2024 has been a tumultuous year for Dragon Ball fans. The passing of creator Akira Toriyama was sudden and tragic, and upon hearing the news, fans worldwide were quick to pay their respects, show their gratitude, and otherwise send so many positive thoughts about the legendary manga artist into the ether that it could have powered multiple spirit bombs. The upcoming series Dragon Ball Daima was one of Toriyama's final projects, and thankfully its premiere will be simultaneously broadcast in multiple territories around the globe. In the age of streaming media, it's easy to take that for granted, but it wasn't always the case. Much like Goku's journey to the West, Dragon Ball's increase in popularity outside of Japan has been long, complicated, and a bit nonsensical, especially in the United States. So join me on this mystical adventure down memory lane, and let's reflect on how Dragon Ball Z's uphill battle to find an English-speaking audience beat the odds and resulted in one of the strongest pop culture properties under the heavens.
This time, let the whole world hear! Yeah!
Have you ever read a book by opening to the very middle of it and just started reading there, assuming you'd figure out what was going on along the way? Because that's basically what it was like if your first exposure to Dragon Ball was the beginning of Dragon Ball Z. But for many Dragon Ball fans, that's exactly how they got started. It's worth pointing out that in the original manga, there is no Z. From Goku's first encounter with Bulma all the way through the defeat of Majin Buu, it's just called Dragon Ball. The events of DBZ start at Volume 17, or Chapter 195 out of 395. When the anime adaptation reached Goku's adult years, after he'd become a dad, it got a slight rebrand when the Z was slapped on.
He's my son. Your son? Pretty wild, huh?
Toriyama's reasoning? Z is the last letter of the alphabet, and he was ready for the series to end, so that was his way of saying, I am done. Of course, the Z half of the series wound up running way longer than Goku's earlier adventures, so that didn't exactly pan out. Goku's really hard to kill off for good, even when you're the guy who created him. The original Dragon Ball anime debuted on Japanese TV in 1986, and it was a hit. It was only a matter of time before its popularity led to it being localized for other territories. In 1988, a Cantonese dub was released in Hong Kong and Macau, and a French dub soon followed, which was dubbed again for other European territories.
À plus de 8,000 unités! 8,000 unités!
What parents want their kids to watch, and what kids actually want to watch, is different from place to place, so depending where Dragon Ball was released, it underwent varying amounts of creative localization and censorship, and saw varying degrees of success. Though Dragon Ball wouldn't fully catch on until a decade later, Goku's Flying Nimbus actually first cruised onto American airwaves just a few years after he debuted in Japan.
Wow, it's great! Thanks, I love it!
In 1989, a company called Harmony Gold USA got the rights to distribute Dragon Ball stateside. Anime fans may be familiar with this company for its creative localization of the Macross series, creative in that they kitbashed 3 disparate anime series together and rebranded them Robotech. Robotech attracted its own American fanbase, but it's generally loathed by anime purists for how it butchered Macross and how difficult licensing deals made it to get the original stateside. Well, Harmony Gold's so-called lost dub of Dragon Ball could very well have put Toriyama's martial arts epic in the exact same situation. Harmony Gold recut and redubbed at least the first 5 episodes of Dragon Ball, and also spliced together the first and third theatrical films into one TV movie. These were aired on a handful of smaller TV stations around the US, but failed to catch on. As you'd expect, the show was edited for content, but as you probably didn't expect, practically the entire cast was renamed for no apparent reason. Goku became Zero, Bulma was now Lena, Oolong, Yamcha, and Puar were now Mao Mao, Zadaki, and Squeaker. Krillin was renamed Bongo, which is especially baffling when you consider that one of the villains of the first movie was already named Bongo, but he became Mayor Domo. The best one though? Korin was now Whiskers the Wonder Cat.
That's a pretty weird and disgusting idea, big guy.
The only thing that made less sense than those new names was the movie itself, which Frankenstein together Curse of the Blood Rubies and Mystical Adventure, which are both already heavily truncated, very loose retellings of entire story arcs of the anime. Harmony Gold USA only dubbed a few episodes, but scripts for 60 were localized and used as the basis for the Spanish language version that would be aired in Mexico in 1991 as Zero y el Dragón Mágico, stupid names and all. It was a failure, but Bandai decided that maybe that had something to do with the localization. Sure enough, after a more faithful Spanish dub was released in 1996, it was a hit.
Contente Son Goku Surasai.
Dragon Ball Z remains immensely popular in Mexico, as indicated by stuff like that viral taqueria named after Goku, or the 2018 international incident that occurred when various local governments helped organize public screenings of the final episodes of Dragon Ball Super, and the Japanese ambassador sent them cease and desist letters, which were completely ignored. Anyway, stateside, much like Shenron lay dormant waiting for someone to collect the Dragon Balls and say the magic words, Dragon Ball remained an untapped licensing goldmine for half a decade after Harmony Gold's officially licensed bootleg flopped. Then, in 1995, enter Funimation, the company that would make Goku a household name eventually. In September 1995, an Alabama newspaper called the Montgomery Advertiser published a full-page story all about Dragon Ball and an interview with Bob Brennan, the Montgomery-based director of licensing for Funimation Productions, who was desperately trying to make it a hit. In his words, "My frustration is taking Dragon Ball to Americans and telling them I have Mickey Mouse in my hands, and they don't understand."
Goku and his friends are truly an international marketing phenomenon and are currently the #1 animated show in Japan, France, Spain, and Hong Kong.
Brennan does his best to contextualize Dragon Ball's potential, pointing out that it has a whopping 500 episodes compared to American cartoon favorites like Roadrunner, who only had a meager 40 cartoon shorts. Brennan also notes that in Japan, Dragon Ball airs 5 days a week during prime time, a luxury that wasn't exactly extended stateside. As the article also notes, any American viewers wanting to check out this Japanese equivalent of Mickey Mouse would need to tune in at 5:30 a.m. on Saturdays. I have a very vague recollection of seeing an episode or two of Dragon Ball around this time, and I think that only happened because my friend set his VCR to record it during its crack of dawn time slot. I recall thinking it was kinda cool, but not really understanding when or where it was from. Sadly, based on Dragon Ball's ratings, most kids weren't eagerly jumping out of bed on Saturdays or setting their VCRs to catch Japan's hottest cartoon show from a decade prior.
I think I'll pass.
Funimation's takeaway was that maybe Dragon Ball wasn't a good fit for American audiences. But what about Dragon Ball Z? Sure, f it, go big or go home. Viewers would be missing 153 episodes of context and setup from the original series, or maybe only 140 if they'd actually woken up to watch that failed 13-episode run, but there was a company that knew a thing or two about getting American kids on board with Japanese shows devoid of context. Saban Entertainment was a powerhouse in 90s children's programming. One of its biggest hits had come from intercutting and dubbing footage of the Japanese show Kyoryu Sentai Zeo Ranger with original footage starring American actors to create Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And hey, if the 16th season of a tokusatsu series that had been airing in Japan since the 1970s could be successfully reverse engineered for American audiences, DBZ would be a breeze, right? Funimation's initial hope was that the amount of action in Z compared to vanilla Dragon Ball would make it an easier sell to bloodthirsty American children, but that was somewhat at odds with Saban's strict guidelines for what should be censored for network TV. For instance, death couldn't be referenced, which is kinda tricky when Goku literally dies 5 episodes into DBZ. There was also a rule against showing children in distress, which meant some edits had to be made to the whole plotline in which 4-year-old Gohan is left to fend for himself in the wilderness before repeatedly having his ass kicked by his father's former archenemy in an effort to toughen him up. By the time all the blood, death, cigarettes, alcohol, sexual harassment, and most egregious filler had been cut out to meet Saban's standard, the first 67 episodes of DBZ had been whittled down to 53 episodes. And to be fair, Dragon Ball Z does have a lot of filler. Decades later, Dragon Ball Kai would recut Z's original 291 episode run down to just 167 episodes, but that was done by Toei, the studio that actually produced it. In the fall of 1996, Saban's neutered version of Dragon Ball Z premiered in first-run syndication, meaning that it was aired on whatever network decided to pick it up. It was successful enough that it ran for 2 seasons, but at that point, Saban was shifting away from syndicated shows. Instead, the production company was working with Fox to turn the massively successful Fox Kids network TV block into a dedicated cable channel for children's programming. If this had actually panned out, it would have likely been a direct competitor to Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. So the partnership with Funimation ended, and Dragon Ball was once again in limbo.
I don't believe it. Is this for real, Dad?
Fortunately, and somewhat poetically, it was Cartoon Network that picked up Dragon Ball Z. Starting in the fall of 1998, the fledgling afternoon programming block Toonami began airing those initial 53 episodes. If you're an American Dragon Ball fan over the age of 30, odds are this is where you first encountered Goku and company. Okay, so here's the part where I could say, and the rest was history. But no, DBZ's success was still far from a sure thing because again, viewers were being introduced to the Dragon Ball universe by getting thrown into the deep end. Even for the select few who'd managed to catch those first 13 episodes of classic Dragon Ball in its pre-dawn time slot on a different channel, a lot happens between Goku wrecking Emperor Pilaf's castle and Raditz showing up.
Kakarot?
That's right. That's your name.
His name?
I was a little late to the party with DBZ, and though I had a vague idea of who Goku was from those half-remembered episodes of Dragon Ball, I still had questions, like, what's up with that dude with 3 eyes, and why does he hang out with that little guy dressed like a French clown? Who the hell is Yajirobe, and why does he live with a talking cat? And most importantly, why does Piccolo hate Goku so much?
I could care less what happens to your son.
Even though they'd been watching DBZ on Toonami since day one, none of my friends actually knew, but they still tuned in every afternoon because the fights were sick. If starting American audiences off with DBZ was a crazy idea, the merchandising was even wilder. At the same time Toonami was airing those first 53 episodes, it was announced that the Canadian toy company Irwin had secured the master license to release action figures based on this potential hit series.
Dragon Ball Z, time capsule and action figures each sold separately.
And much in the same way that Funimation repackaged a 10-year-old cartoon with some minor changes for American audiences, much of Irwin Toys' early products did the exact same thing to existing merchandise. For instance, they gave Vegeta a gun?
Yes, that's how it happened.
At this point, DBZ had already been airing in Japan, Spain, Hong Kong, France, and Mexico, and most of those territories had generated their own slew of tie-in products, which Irwin could reissue stateside, and which they did with complete and utter disregard for what episodes of the show had actually aired in the USA. So, compounding the questions I already had about Goku's past, a stroll through my local KB Toys left me with even more about his future. On top of completely spoiling the big reveal of Goku's Super Saiyan form, which wouldn't happen on Toonami until late 1999, Irwin's starting lineup of action figures included Frieza's final form plus the next two big bads, Cell and Majin Buu. We also got characters who were years away from being introduced, like both versions of Trunks, Goten, and Gohan's teenage Super Saiyan form. It's not unheard of for toys to contain spoilers, like the Batman Mask of the Phantasm action figure that unmasked the titular Phantasm, or the Jango Fett with removable head action feature, but never before has a kids show's official toy line overwhelmingly featured characters who wouldn't actually appear on the show for years. Who the f are Janemba and Hildegard? Why does Goku have a giant yellow mullet and a halo? Does Vegeta actually get a gun at some point? Dragon Ball Z left me with a lot of questions, but thankfully, the show's American rise in popularity coincided with widespread access to this thing called the internet. There, I quickly discovered just how popular Dragon Ball was globally, and that plenty of hardcore fans in the American otaku community were ahead of the curve thanks to fan-translated bootleg recordings of the series. Thanks to these high-level elder weebs diligently chronicling Goku's earlier and later years, I was able to find answers to many of my questions, though it is still very unclear why that Vegeta figure came with a gun.
To each his own.
Back in the Stone Age of dial-up, watching videos online wasn't really a thing, let alone 500 plus episodes of an anime series. So I settled for reading episode descriptions on various fan sites and still religiously tuning into Toonami every day to see what would happen next, even if I knew it was coming. Looking back on it, making the target audience feel like they're out of the loop from the jump is a completely baffling approach to creating a successful media product. Funimation brute-forced viewers into DBZ with no prior world building or proper character introductions, and then they okayed a toy line that further confused any cohesive brand identity with action figures of other characters who wouldn't be relevant until literally hundreds of episodes later. Janemba and Hildegard, for the record, first appear in two DBZ movies that wouldn't officially release in North America until 2006. I can't imagine that Funimation's business plan banked on the chance that the average viewer in their 9 to 12-year-old target demographic was willing to do supplemental research to make sense of this wacky show where dudes named after vegetables and musical instruments and underwear beat the shit out of each other every afternoon. But maybe they did count on the fact that the show was awesome enough that viewers wouldn't sweat the details and would just figure it out along the way. And I guess they were right. It took 3 failed attempts for Akira Toriyama's martial arts masterpiece to catch on with American audiences, but much like Goku himself, taking a few beatings just made Dragon Ball come back even more powerful. Its rise in popularity happened piecemeal around the world, but today it is an undeniable global phenomenon. Whether it's the palpable enthusiasm of packed stadiums in Mexico cheering for Goku as he wails on Jiren in the final episodes of Super, or bizarre benchmarks of what constitutes mainstream appeal here in the States, like Goku showing up in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, or Piccolo and Krillin appearing in car commercials. Or all of the people who came out of the woodwork to pay their respects following Toriyama's passing, from Jackie Chan, to the Prime Minister of France, to the guy who played Goku in that horrible live-action movie that we don't talk about, to 30,000 fans in Argentina performing a Genki Dama in unison. Saying this cartoon has reached a lot of people is kind of an understatement. As nostalgic as I am for those early days of DBZ on Toonami, I'm so grateful that this series got popular enough that we don't have to watch Daima the same way. We won't have to wait a decade for it to catch on, or comb the internet to make sense of it. And we probably won't have any storylines spoiled by action figures, though that remains to be seen. We'll all get to experience Akira Toriyama's final work together as a global community of fans, and really, that feels like a wish come true. So, what was your first exposure to Dragon Ball, Z, GT, Super, or otherwise, and what burning questions did it leave you with? Why do you think Vegeta had a gun? Let me know in the comments below, and for all the best in pop culture, even when it's a little bit confusing, keep your scouters locked on IGN.
So long, everybody!